Good evening, everybody. The time is 6:32, and I'd like to welcome everybody to this meeting of the Scrutiny Committee on Monday, the 19th of July. For those listening and watching, my name is Councillor Carol Griffin, I'm Chair of the Committee. I have a few housekeeping points to make before we begin. Please can I advise that the open parts of the meeting are being audio recorded and live streamed to the Council's website. In addition, a video recording of the meeting is being made and will be available shortly afterwards. We have a mix of in-person and online participation today. So for those in the room, please can I ask you to speak clearly, remember to use your microphones. For those online, please can I ask that you mute your microphone until you are needed to speak. And please can everyone ensure that mobile phones and other electronic devices are silent or switched off, please. The fire evacuation procedure for those of us in the room. In the unlikely event that it's necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow any instruction given to you by staff or fire marshals who will be wearing high visibility jackets and all fire exits clearly marked by the green exit signs. Please proceed quickly and calmly to the assembly points in Abbey Gardens. Please do not use the lift. We've got quite a packed agenda this evening. I just want to set members' expectations that we will significantly overrun the predicted 2 hours, and I'm anticipating a 10:30 finish. I just want to check that the members are comfortable with that. Good. Because of the packed agenda, I would appreciate if your comments are concise and clear, so that we can move through those questions as quickly as possible. Get the answers also concisely and clearly. So turning to item 1 on the agenda, the appointment of Vice Chairperson of the Council this year. Are there any nominations for Vice Chair, please? I nominate Councillor Lomby. Do I have a second for Councillor Lomby?
I'd like to second that if I may, Chair.
Do we have any other nominations? Right, Councillor Lomby, thank you. Congratulations, you.
Come out, please.
Excuse me. So does everybody support? Yeah, great. Any apologies tonight, Matthew?
Thank you, Chair. No apologies, although I believe Councillor Horrell may be a little bit late, but she will join us as soon as she can.
Absolutely. Do we have any disclosure of interest this evening? Okay. I don't have any announcements this evening. So on to item 5 of the agenda, minutes of the previous meeting of the 11th of March 2021. It's on pages 7 to 10 of your agenda. Are the previous minutes correct? Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. So we are now on to public participation. We have 2 members of the public joining us tonight.
Sorry, apologies, Chair. Shouldn't be. Regulation.
Chairman, I'm having great difficulty hearing everybody. Could I ask at some risk to my personal safety that the aircon be turned off? I've got a very nice draft between the 2 doors.
Shall we try speaking a little louder, folks?
Very nice, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lomby. Is that better, Councillor Bell?
Much better.
So we have 2 members of the public joining us tonight, Patrick Davis and Mr. David Light on behalf of TACT. I believe Mr. Davis wanted to speak regarding item 7, Central Winchester Regeneration, and Mr. Light wanted to speak concerning the item from Housing Revenue Outturn paper. Mr. Davis, did you want to speak? Did you want to speak on the item when we get to it? It's to do it now during public
I
participation.
think it might be helpful if I said a few words now, because as you'll understand, if I start, you'll see what I'm getting at.
Okay. business advisors.
Thank you, Chair. We certainly can time it. We've got a 3 minutes timer, but yeah, that's no problem. So.
Okay, Mr. Davis, you would like to begin?
Yes, thank you very much. What I wanted to raise really was the role of your meeting in dealing with a matter as important as this, because it's only a day and a bit between now and the cabinet meeting when the final decision will be made. If any meaningful scrutiny is meant to take place at this tax meeting, a little over 24 hours before the cabinet determined the issue, it seems absurd. And I've looked at the part of your constitution dealing with overview scrutiny rules. I have read it all. I do wonder sometimes if members ever read it. And it just seems to me that this is totally inappropriate way of getting any meaningful scrutiny of key issues that are going to affect Winchester for generations to come. And the particular issues that I've raised before, just on the question of the failure to provide a new bus station, watering down the SPD, which had a fairly firm commitment to a bus hub that was a real feature with all the facilities you expect. That's been brushed aside with a view to being looked at in the long term, long after people have had a habit, in my view, of coming back onto the buses. That's just one issue. And it seems to me that this is totally the wrong way of dealing with something as important as this. I do not understand how you can scrutinise that aspect or anything else tonight in advance of the cabinet meeting on Wednesday. And I don't really understand why it's being dealt with like this. I note from the paper, and I have read it, that there was an all-member event on the same day as the public event, where presumably all in a huddle you were able to toss things around and probably say foolish things, which I think perhaps ought to be reported. I don't understand why these issues are dealt with in that way. And the other issue that's come up in the last week, and again it's been an issue of concern to a lot of people, is archaeology on the site. I was supportive of up to a point of the council's view because it appeared in the early days that Professor Biddle was in support of what the council were doing. If the long article in the Hampshire Chronicle last week is to be believed, Professor Biddle now takes a very different view. He may have done that all along and feels that serious archaeology should take place in advance of anything else. And how is that issue going to be addressed? Those are just 2 points on an enormously hundreds of pages of paper that you are supposed to scrutinise tonight. How on earth do you do it? And I think this whole situation, the way the council scrutinises key issues, needs to be readdressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Very much appreciate your input. Mr. Light, I understand that you wanted to speak on the housing revenue outturn figure, which is significantly further down the agenda.
Yeah.
Would you like to speak on that now with reference to that?
Yeah,
Fabulous. Please do go ahead.
okay. We had a meeting with Dick Johnson online, and we had a look at the HRA budget, and we noted that a good position, that they had a good position financially, but COVID had some impact on some services. And it is tacked also like to ask that some sites the council was sitting on could be brought forward using their improved financial resources. And the question was asked whether council was negotiating to buy land in Hairstyle Road. And I had a reply from Andrew Palmer, which said land still was for sale, but has little chance of being developed at current time. And I'd just like to say, although tax supports affordable housing and Help to Buy schemes could priority be given to build more council houses to reduce waiting lists in the future. And after meeting the applicant, somebody sent me an email and asked me whether Now property services are part of estates. If HRA will be funding estates as well, and we also support the HRA welfare budget to help people that are finding difficulty after COVID, etc. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Knight, I appreciate your contribution. I think we'll come to that during, I've made a note of the questions you asked, and we'll come to that during when we get to the later, if that's okay. If you aren't able to listen, you can, of course, the minutes will be out and that will be out.
Yeah, I'll have a look when the minutes come out, I expect, yeah. Okay.
Mr. Botham, just going to comment, Botham.
Right.
Chair, I'd also be happy to speak to David after the meeting with any with feedback on the outcome of the meeting tonight, if he's not at the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Botham.
Chairman, may I propose a change to the agenda, please? I have some sympathy with Mr. Joseph's comments. Given that central Winchester regeneration is the most important business, the major business on the agenda tonight, and the one to which we want to give an enormous amount of time. May I suggest that we take item 9 next, followed by item 13, the external bodies, then go into item 7, CWR, followed by the exempt paper. I do not want to lose the thread of our debate while we look at several other papers before we get on to business case. Councillor Power, what I'm anticipating happening this evening is we'll go through item 7, then we'll go to the exempt straight away, rather than wait until we get to item further down the paper. It does seem unfair that Mrs. Lightwood, who will no doubt like to hear the debate, would have to wait until after central Winchester. Understood. It's already been discussed with Mr. Light at some length, and he was happy with plan to do it. And as Mr. Botham also offered to speak directly to him. Are you're happy with that? That was discussed with you earlier.
It was discussed earlier, but I only knew earlier, yeah. But yeah, that as the Winchester regeneration needs a long talk over, I think that as long as I can speak somewhere after, not tonight, but somewhere in the future, and get some answers, I'll be happy with that. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Light. Is that okay, Councillor Powell?
Thank you.
Thank you. So we will now come on to item 7 of our agenda, the central Winchester regeneration. So the recommendation of the scrutiny on page 11 is that the scrutiny committee comment on the proposals within the attached cabinet report, which is to be considered on the meeting on the 21st of July. And I believe Mrs. Lyons is going to give us a presentation to introduce this.
Thank you, Chair. And good evening, everyone. I don't usually sit down, but I'll try and stay seated tonight. I think Matthew's just going to load the presentation for us. So what the presentation will do a quick sort of overview of what the business case is all about, being the crux of one of the recommendations of the Cabinet report. It will talk about the pros and the cons and how we've gone through bringing the business case to being. We'll then look at the section on King's Walk, and then we'll look at timelines and next steps. And then I think, Chair, if there are any other questions around anything else, then we can sweep those up at the end. So the agenda for tonight, as I say, a quick introduction to the business case, what we've looked at through the business case, what we plan to do, or what is recommended for taking forward at Cabinet on Wednesday, and then next steps. So the business case stage that we're currently at is the strategic outline and case. And this slide here just shows the process of developing the final business case. So you can see from this slide, and again, you've seen this before, this is cutting out, I do apologise. You've seen this slide perhaps perhaps before, but it does say the stages that we go through for the business case. We're at the strategic outline, which is stage 1, which sets the case for change and looks at the reason for doing the project. And we then go forward, the recommendation being to the next stage, which is the outline business case, which looks in far more detail at the potential delivery route and the potential options that we were looking at, before finally going through the full business case, which is everything worked up in totality before we end up entering into any agreements with anything and anyone. So just the next slide shows a brief reminder of where we're at. And you can see here, we concentrate on the strategic and the economic reasons and the case for change, with some work around the other 5 cases that make up a full business case. We operate with the Treasury Green Book process. So what we've done is, on the next slide, Matthew, if you could, is to set out the case for change. You can see on this slide again, it's one that you've probably seen before. Why we're doing Central Winchester, we've got the council plan, we've got the supplementary document, and we've also done some competitive positioning work.
Can we replace?
Yeah, could we replace this?
Matthew, can we replace the microphone, please?
Okay, let's try that one then. So again, you'll probably be quite familiar with the documents there, which really states the case for change for Central Winchester. The next slide that we come to sets out the objectives that we are trying to achieve by delivering Central Winchester. And again, these will be familiar to you, these headings. They were the headings through the consultation back at the end of last year. And again, I won't dwell on these. The full presentation is online, should anybody want to go and take a closer look later. But it's work, live, play, student experience, overnight tourism, and of course, sustainable development. So that's the investment objectives that we've set, by which the options will be judged against, and also the critical success factors, which is on the next slide. So once we've delivered Central Winchester, and as we start to look at the options outlined in the business case, it's how do those delivery options meet these critical success factors. And again, you've probably seen those in the past, and I won't dwell on them tonight. But that is fully explained in the strategic outline case. So we started out with a long list of delivery options, and as I say, those previous slides, we judged everything against them. And on top of all that, we've also had to consider the levels of control and the levels of risk. And you can see on that slide there, we've looked at various different options, and they sit on a scale of differing control and risk levels. So it goes from disposing of the site through to the Winchester City Council acting as master developer and various options in between. So again, you've seen these before, so moving on to the next slide. On top of the critical success factors that we established for the successful project, there are also some key considerations that the council needs to think about as it's trying to move the project forward. Key, again, this was part of the consultation: finance, timing, risk, control, and expertise. So not only will the delivery options be judged against the critical success factors and the investment objectives, but how do they meet these particular considerations as well. And you can see on the next slide how the different development options, I'll dwell a little bit on this one, but not too long, because again, it's all online should you wish to have a look afterwards. But you can see here we've judged all of the delivery options against those key levels and key factors. And you can see there from the scores at the bottom, that option 4 and option 5 have come out with high scores of 24 and 27. Also, you can see there that master developer, which was an option we had considered, scores very low. There's very little level of control over. There's very little that we can do about the cost. We have to bear the brunt of the cost, the planning risk. It's a very sort of risky route to take. And you can also see that although the disposal of the site scores quite highly, the control level there is zero, which means there's very little control that the council would have. So you can see how we pitched the scoring on that. And so moving on to the next slide, there's a little bit more detail about how those two shortlisted options then meet those critical success factors. And from this slide, you can see that developing King's Walk with a development partner, which was option 4, scores 21 against those success factors, and a single or development partner across the site, and I'll come on to what that site is shortly. A development partner with a development agreement scores 23, so it achieves higher on those critical success factors, hence that being the preferred option. So moving on to the next slide is a little bit more detail about how that scoring has come about. It stresses the advantages and the disadvantages as to why we've ended up with the preferred delivery route there of a development partner across the defined site with a development agreement. So moving on to the next slide, this is the defined site. This shows where the site that we're talking about sits within the SPD red line. The red line obviously is there in red, and the defined site, which we're currently talking about with a development partner, is outlined in blue, and that sits within the SPD area. So moving on. With a development agreement, which is again what the business case is building towards and what the recommendation would be for us to go on and explore further. How would a development agreement work? Well, it's a contractual arrangement. They're very individual. There's not a one-size-fits-all, and it can include various different terms and conditions that meets the objectives, financial, phasing, all those things that you can see there can be written in and agreed at that stage in the development agreement, with levels of control and how we deal with any change and any variations. And the detail of what goes into the development agreement is going to be explored fully in the next stage, which is the outline business case, where we start to delve a little bit more into this option. So the next slide just then goes on to explain how it's different from the last time that we talked about the development agreement and the Silk Hill area. Very different situation now. We, as the council, are the majority landowner across the site, and therefore we can regulate the required steps and responsibilities. We're not beholden to a developer to tell us how it should be done. We can choose the right partner to work with, and we can then work with that partner going forward with regard to plans and planning and how we meet the shared objectives. So moving on to the next slide. This outlines how we would go about finding a development partner and all the different things that could be written into a development agreement. And again, I won't go through those line by line, but it really does sum up how we can work with a development agreement to make the central Winchester site come forward. The next slide shows then how it does relate and conform to the SPD, and you can see there, as explained, that the main crux of the decision to go out to procurement is not at this stage, it's at the outline business case stage, but at this stage we want to look at how a development agreement with a single partner across our defined site can meet those objectives that the SPD sets out. So we're looking at those outcomes. We can retain that incremental approach. We can include multiple design inputs across the scheme with various different architects and partners, and it enables that cross-subsidising when it comes to infrastructure and public realm, so that we can ensure that the uses we would like within the SPD area are actually delivered. The next slide then takes us on to looking at what we would do with King's Walk, because of course the recommendation in the Cabinet report is that actually we do a short-term meanwhile use strategy for King's Walk rather than deliver that out ourselves as a council. So we did some soft market testing, and the outputs of that went into the outline case, which then led us to the sort of reality of the situation, and that actually the best thing for us to do would be to do a 3-year programme of meanwhile uses whilst we've got a development partner on board. So that's what the recommendation will be. But we do want to do King's Walk. We're very committed to bringing around activity to the site. The next slide states already that we've got budget to do that. So it was agreed back in March, where we were looking to provide some enhancements to the ground floor, looking at what we can do with the loading bay and improving the Silver Hill frontage. That spend was subject to condition surveys, which we've now had done. The condition surveys, on the next slide, please, Matthew, have shown that there's a fair bit of work that needs doing to King's Walk, especially as you look up at those upper floors, which is why the costs have been fed into the business case to lead us down the line that actually it's better to do it with a single development partner within that defined site. So what we are recommending, and the recommendation in the Cabinet report, if we look at the next slide, is that we would like additional budget on top of that budget that was approved in March to do enhanced works to those areas on the ground floor, so that we can really start to curate and create that creative quarter. So that is the recommendation in the report, that we do that. So the next steps are, as you are all aware, we are at Cabinet with this Cabinet report on Wednesday the 21st, with the recommendations as set out in the reports that we're discussing tonight, with the view to moving on to coming back to Cabinet for approval of the outline business case, which then sets out the procurement route and the details of the procurement, and we aim to do that in the autumn of this year. So that is a whistle-stop tour of the process and what the business case covers. So back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Lyons, I really appreciate that. So the key part of the Central Winchester Regeneration paper is the strategic outline case. So I suggest we go to that and come back to the report at the end, the report itself, if there are any outstanding points that we haven't covered going through the strategic outline case and associated appendices. So I would first of all like to come to section 1, which is on pages 86 to 92 of your agenda packs, looking at the executive summary. And I'd like to ask if anybody has any questions on the executive summary section of strategic outline case, please. No questions on that, please? No.
Sorry, Chair, which pages are you looking at?
86 to 92 of your agenda pack. Councillor Lumley.
Thank you, Chair. I thought I could go first and give everyone time to find page 86. Thank you for the presentation, very excellent. Getting better and better with each iteration of 3 years. Can I ask a question? Actually, Ms. Davis was specifically raised the question on the archaeology, and it's because the route that you're proposing to go is a phase of a single developer doing a development in phases, and a number of the really important things are that it's built out in its entirety, and the developer is incentivized to do it all, noting that the first phase with the affordable housing is probably one of the less attractive phases. How does that interplay with the archaeology? Obviously, King's Walk is the safe archaeological zone. Frankly, to be demolished that car park, the better in my view. are we sure that our phasing works with the archaeological investigations? Or are we in danger of a collapsed area and road? How does that work?
Thank you, Councillor Orby. I'll answer briefly and then maybe go to Councillor Lurley on this one. But I think the work that we're currently doing at the moment is in line with the modern guidance and the planning policy, which is to preserve in situ. So we're not at this stage planning an excavation. What we're doing at the moment is exploring the conditions of the ground so that we know the condition of any deposits that will be down there. We then can inform any developer coming on board of the state of those any deposits that will be down there, and then that will then inform the best way to deliver the development regarding foundations, building blocks, etc. So we're not looking to find what's down there, we're looking at the moment to establish the state of what's down there. Councillor Loney, I think you've also got something you'd like to bring in at this point.
Is that on? Yeah, good. Yes, I think throughout this, we've been really keen to follow best archaeological practice, and we still intend to stick by that. One of the things that we are going to do is reconvene the Central Winchester Regeneration Archaeology Panel to have a look at what we found so far and whether their advice has changed. But I think it's quite instructive if you go back to the work that was done by that panel, the report that was made, which are all still available on the City Council website, and the technical reports, which do spell out what needs to be done. And that's independent of whether you do the site as a whole or the site as a series of smaller packages. You know, there is a single methodology that they're recommending in either case, which works. The issue about Professor Biddle's article in the Chronicle, I have to say he hasn't been in contact with me about that or about the scheme. And certainly at the time, and he did chair the archaeology group, he was very clear that the intention was that we should be following national planning guidance, which was around preservation, and that the panel was of the view that that should be the case. As I say, it's quite easy to refer back to the documents that were produced then, which are on the council website.
Thank you to both of you for that. So again, on section 1, the executive summary, do we have any other questions? Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask a question, if I may. You refer to going explore the conditions, and then we refer to Councillor Learning referring to best practice. What I'd like to ask is with reference to the archaeology exploration that's been made, is what sort of depth has this work been carried out at any time? I mean, has it just been, you know, a few centimetres, or has it been a couple of metres dug down? Because that is really important with archaeology, how far you dig, how deep you dig them. So I just want to sort of ask a little bit more about the deposits and the depth. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, absolutely. The boreholes have been sunk several metres down into the soil and established the, so we can look at the different sort of levels then and what the conditions will be. We do know there's quite a high water table there at the moment. So it's a question of now, I think we've got a year's worth of data. We started almost a year ago collecting the data from these core samples that have come out. We're monitoring the water levels to see the seasonal variations. And I think, as Councillor Lenny mentioned, we're reconvening the panel. We've had several of those panel members come back to us this week saying they'd love to still be involved in that and come back to talk to us. And we can really then explore what those soil samples have started to show.
If I may, Chair, some of the soil samples go down to 6 metres deep, so it is pretty expensive.
And may I ask another question, if that's all right, on the same vein, if that's okay?
Yes.
With reference to the archaeology, we refer to the Hampshire Chronicle piece, and that Professor Little hadn't been in contact with Councillor Ernie, then perhaps maybe Councillor Ernie would like to get in contact with him, I don't know. But you also referred to the group restarting. When is that likely to happen? The archaeology group, when is that likely to be reforming that you referred to? Is there a date in the diary for that?
There isn't a date as yet. We are waiting to try to get, there's 5 or 6 different archaeologists on that panel. They're all extremely busy, so the team are liaising with those as we speak to try and get a date. But obviously we want to try and get that as soon as we can, to be honest, sort of autumn, hopefully.
Then may I say, if that group is not formed, surely then you wouldn't be proceeding with anything until that group is formed for their opinion of the work on the archaeology side of things. So would I be right in saying that?
Well, we're following the advice that they gave, and what we would be doing is not to get their seal of approval on that necessarily. It's more to get their comment and to explain the samples and the findings that we've got, and then how that will then help us inform the site as we go forward and the development as it comes forward.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Krask, you had a question?
Thank you, Chair. So thank you. A lot of work has been done on something that's very challenging. If I look at the black holes, for them of the postal challenge and what we're looking to achieve, and then compare that, or bear that in mind in terms of page 87 when we look at the economic case, when we talk about the best public value to society. Obviously within that there's a financial case in terms of we've got to make some money on this, but it's clearly not about making money in and of itself. There are other public values that we're looking to create. If the black bubbles represent what we're looking to create over and above financial return, how do we measure those black bubbles and assess if we've achieved what we set out to?
Thank you. That's a very good question. As we go through the strategic outline case, section by section, the economic case gives a nod at this stage to what we would be looking to understand how we would measure those. Our colleagues or our consultants rather at JLL has set sort of formulae and processes to go through that helps measure how we improve some of those things and how we establish whether those are actually being successfully delivered. And that is more explored in the next case. So as we come towards the outline business case, that will be more fully explored through the next few weeks and months.
Thank you, Mr. Lyons. Councillor Williams.
Yes, so on page 88 as well, on assessment 3, solution delivery, I think one of the questions on the draft about 3.5, about conceptual agreement that has been included as one third option is the site with the one development partner. And I suppose what I want to, I think some of the questions and the concerns I've heard we'll talk about is the Winchesterness of the project and whether that can be delivered with one developer. And I suppose that would be my question, as that's become our preferred option, sort of why?
Thank you. Councillor Burnley, is that something you would like to come in on?
I'll just hold this down. I think one of the key things here that we will be more responsive to development.
Councillor Lanning, if you could pause there.
Yeah, I think one of the key things that we'll be looking for as part of the development, and certainly from a development partner, is a commitment to architectural diversity, which is something that we see throughout the streetscape of Winchester, that variation in different buildings, which is, I believe, what people meant by Winchesterness, which is a phrase I've always hated, as it's just a bit too vague for me. But I think that is something that we can look to build into the development brief going forwards. And I'm really keen to hear from members about how they'd like to see that articulated and expressed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. I note on page 89, there's a long list of additional required services the council might need to bring this project to fruition. It's clear that a considerable amount of money has already been spent on external resources, consultants to resource. And I just wondered, how we are managing or how we can estimate just quite how much more money will be required for those external resources. It's obviously that eats into the council's return. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that Ms. Lyons or Councillor Lowe?
I'm happy to take that one.
That's definitely an obvious one.
I thought it might be. Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. What we've done almost from the word go is we've got a long sort of list of key gateways and key stages that we would need to go through with cost estimates, and we are working towards that and fulfilling those as we go along. So we've got an idea of what the costs are likely to be. It's managed and monitored through the process that we have governance through, we've got project board and various different things and financial checks and balances. So there is a process that's been working already, which we will continue to follow as we move forward.
Thank you, Ms. Lyons. As we don't seem to have any other questions on this section, I shall move on to section 2, the strategic case. Ms. Lyons, could you take us through the key points of this section, please?
Yes, of course. So there are five cases that make up a business case. The first of those is the strategic. And what that does is, as we touched on, it sets the case for change. It really sort of says why are we doing the project and what are the drivers for the project. So the strategic element there looks at the policies that would govern what we're doing, why we want to try and do Central Winchester. Again, this is where we come with the investment objectives, the success criteria. So it really sets the scene for why we're doing the project.
Thank you, Ms. Lyons. So this is questions on section 2, pages 93 to 100 of your agenda. Do I have any questions on this section? Councillor Becker.
Thanks, Chair. I have two questions. One is more a clarification and the second one is a question. On page 94, the second line states that the area outlined in blue is the defined site, which is only WCC owned land. Can I just ask what is shown by Appendix E there? Because it seems to show site potentially owned by others, but I couldn't find reference to Appendix E through the rest of the report. And then my second question is, on page 97, there is reference to the ageing population, which is also discussed in the paper, in the sections above. But the focus does seem to be on the older people and workers. There seems to be very little emphasis on the needs of families, children, and abilities for young people. Yet if you look at the numbers, if you add up the numbers of children and young people, they far exceed the older people. So I just wondered how they would be taken into account for this process.
Thank you. The proposals area, Appendix E, I believe, is the development proposals.
So it's a chart that shows, it seems to show land building ownership. It includes, again, the college, it includes the M&S owned or leased building. But there's no heading on it to indicate what it is intended to show.
The plans that we've got here, we've got the plan that we showed in the presentation, which is the red line, followed by the development proposals, followed by the blue defined site. I'm sorry, I haven't got the plan that you're referring to.
Sorry, it's page 149, that one.
Ah, right, okay, so that's the land ownership plan. So that's really just to show to people what is owned by Winchester City Council. So that's not any of that doesn't define any boundaries of what we're looking at. It just says within the red line of the SPD, this is the land ownership and who owns what within the red line.
So the blue line excludes all of that land, isn't it, by
Others, yes, yes, yes. And secondly, with regards to the point about the ageing population, what Central Winchester, again, Councillor Lurley, might be something you'd like to come in on. We're actually gearing up the scheme very much towards the youngsters. Councillor Lurley.
Yeah, I think this very much responds to the gap analysis work that we've done, which identifies the real problem Winchester has in retaining. It's not only its own young people, but the graduates that come here. This is a significant issue for local employers who have trouble attracting young graduates here to Winchester. Now, that doesn't mean that we're ignoring the needs of families or older people within the scheme. It's just around who will be aiming, for example, the Housing Act. You know, I mean, we know that, you know, very few families, particularly in these COVID times, want to live in flats. They're very keen on small houses with gardens instead. So we won't be able to fulfil some of those kind of needs on the site if we want to achieve the kind of things that we want to do. But those needs can be filled elsewhere, and they'll also be fulfilled by the market. One of the things we're looking to do is to look at those gaps where the market will not provide. We know that the market will happily provide older people's housing until the cows come home if we let them. But that creates a danger for the long-term future of our local economy, which I think is really important to address. And it's not only around the housing needs, it's about creating somewhere which is more vibrant, somewhere where we've got a decent, better evening economy offer. But at the same time, we'll have those quiet riverside walks, which we're looking to extend, you know, not beyond the site towards Winnell Moors, and also working in the other direction to take people through into the Broadway. So these are all really important to us, but we can't do everything on one site, and we need to think about what we can best achieve on each of these development sites that the City Council has control over.
Can I just urge that providing facilities for families and children does assist in retaining those groups within the city as well. Please do keep that in mind.
Do we have any other questions on this section? Councillor Lumley.
Thank you, Chair. On the main benefits criteria, nowhere do we mention cultural offering, big attraction that's going to make us unique and take us on to the next stage. Although we do get reference to nighttime offering, and in there there's also no reference to the benefit of providing a new bus station. I'm concerned that both those two, by their omission, we may be on a first step towards their disappearance. Secondly, on the main risks, I noticed the last risk is political risk of failing to deliver the project. The mitigation is the minimum uses of doing something in King's Walk. I'm just going to query whether the reason to be King's Walk is for the political risk, and that actually that's a wrong reason for doing the development. And I therefore question whether we should be, and I hope we are later in the meeting coming back to the financial aspect of King's Walk, because I'd like to explore that further. But I do think that doing it simply for some sort of political risk reasons is just wrong. And finally, sorry, in terms of the dependencies, surely one of the dependencies is also actually the archaeology, because if we do discover that there is Professor Bill's, what did he say, what's amphitheatre, thank you, right in the middle of the site, what's the effect going to be of that?
Thank you. Thank you. I think what we'll do is councillor learning. I think archaeology is something that you've got quite a passion to talk about. So councillor learning will talk to you about the archaeology, but with regards to buses, for example, and so the other maybe the buses. The night. We have added the culture element into the investment objectives. So that is there now as part of one of the, under the live, work, play. Part of that also is now cultural and heritage experience. So you're absolutely right, we've included that now. So that's tick that one, because you are right. Culture and heritage is really important. With regards to buses, again, we've got, there's a lot of debate around that, and I think we're all aware that we're bringing forward Central Winchester at the same time that the movement strategy is starting to sort of take shape as well. Councillor Learning, I don't know if there's something you would like to say on that, because I think that there's quite a lot of interplay and integration there.
Yeah, I mean, if we start with the issues around the bus station, we're actually working really closely with Hampshire County Council on the movement strategy and buses, not only in central Winchester, but the wider area. We've had really positive meetings with the County Council and indeed Councillor Humby, where we've shared a joint commitment to the Bus Back Better agenda, which some of you may have come across, which advocates for a considerable increase in bus use, not just managing buses that we've already got, but actually managing a considerable increase in the bus services. Right now, we're not in a position where we can exactly specify what's going to be needed to fulfil those future needs and to enable us to play a full part in that agenda. The bus station was mentioned in the SPD as an option on Middlebrook Street. That option still remains open, and the further work done through the movement strategy will help inform whether that comes forward or whether some alternative solution is called for. What we have done is to create an interim bus solution which doesn't interfere with any of the potential outcomes of the movement strategy. It also fulfills a major function in the Bus Back Better agenda, which has made the SPD slightly outdated, which is a real emphasis on keeping bus stops close to where people want to get on and off the bus. That's something at a recent meeting with a representative of Winchester Access for All, which represents disabled groups, was very keen to see that we retain bus stops very close to that Marks and Spencer corner, if you like, which is a key point for shoppers in the town. So it's all about how we manage these things. But right now, we don't have a final solution to what the road network's going to look like in Winchester, what the bus network's going to be, where the interchanges are actually going to take place. We might see more interchanges in future at the railway station, for example, not just happening in the centre of a town. What the final solution is going to be in terms of buses in the Broadway, whether we move those elsewhere. National Express buses also need to be taken into account. So this is a really complicated and will be quite extended piece of work. We do have some of the initial outputs coming from the Winchester movement strategy work coming through at the moment. So those will be going into the public domain fairly soon, which set out some of the options going forward. The other thing around the movement strategy is the funding will be very opportunistic. So we're not going to be able to guarantee when various aspects of the movement strategy come forward. Where we've got a £20 million bill for the bus station and the associated traffic changes that are needed, that could come forward through some government funding scheme next year. It might not come forward 5, 10, who knows. So we have to be aware of those uncertainties around when funding schemes will happen. But the important thing to emphasise at the moment is that, you know, people have waited a long time for central Winchester regeneration and they want to see us getting on with it. If we wait until absolutely all these details are settled, we could be looking at another 10 years. You know, there was the other issue was around the archaeology. There is I mean, again, this is all in the technical, I don't want to go into too much detail, but this is all in the technical documents that are available on the website as to the processes that have gone through, what developers need to do, whether that be a single developer or an individual developer on part of the site, which involve initial archaeological work to see what's there and what's going to be needed going forward. So again, we won't know until some of the outputs from those initial pieces of work come back to us. It may be that considerable digging will happen at some point, but preservation is national policy, so we'll need to wait and see on that.
Thank you, Councillor Lanning. Do I have any other questions on this section? Councillor Cress.
Apologies. Thank you.
One moment, Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Lumpy. Yeah, I was looking at the risk here under 2.8. And one of the risks, you're absolutely right, political risk of failure to deliver the project. So one of the mitigating actions is that we do something on King's Walk in the short term to show delivery, whilst the longer term preferred approach is delivered. So it's not the fact that it's risky not to do it, or to do King's Walk, or not to do King's Walk. It's the political risk is around not doing anything and not to be seen to be doing anything. So if we are going to recommend that the preferred option is to have a single development partner deliver King's Walk, the longer term vision, we as a council can mitigate that risk of not doing anything by kick-starting that with a short-term in-my uses option, which then the longer-term delivery partner and development partner can build on to deliver the longer-term creative uses in that water.
Thank you, Mrs. Lyons. Councillor Cress.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps you could just have a little bit, just so I understand, I've got a number of questions. So we're looking at the strategic outline case, which is Appendix D of the cabinet paper. We then look at the cabinet paper. So
We will come back to the cabinet paper at the end if there's any questions outstanding once we've been through the strategic outline case.
okay, very good, thank you. Because the risks are something I'm interested in, and if I look at the main risks, it's interesting that they're different on page 99, and they are on Appendix B. Appendix B. So Appendix B, the cabinet paper, lists a good number of risks, which seem to be different in the main and more detailed than they do on page 99. But I find the main risks so interesting here. There's one thing which is interesting around the third one being pushback from neighbouring landlords and residents excluded from the current proposal. The mitigating action is to engage with the neighbouring landlords and residents, which I can see in terms of the open forum, and as I think it was Patrick Davis, if I got it right, if I remember, spoke about his participation, and I heard the residents speak in that open forum. So there has been a good amount of stakeholder engagement. But what do we mean by pushback, and what does pushback to look like? Because I'm not, what I was surprised about was legal challenge. So if I look at Appendix B, it refers to a mitigating a risk being legal challenge. And legal challenge is a concern for me, I'd like to talk about, because it does seem we have a number of legal challenges on various applications. And I'm interested in what is the risk of legal challenge for this project, because I want to get it as much as anybody does. And managing the risks of legal challenge, which seems to come up regularly. Well, what is pushback? Is it pushback legal challenge? That's my question. Is pushback legal challenge?
Okay, the slides, I'll send you the big that up.
So thank you, Councillor President. There are two different sort of risk sort of tables. There is the overarching risk register for the whole project that sits within the council as our risk register, which is appended to the cabinet report. The risks outlined in the strategic outline case are around the issues and the elements of the outline case, which are slightly less broad than the overarching risks that sit within the project as a whole. So this risk is around the risks of the strategic outline case. Might not help, but they're different, coming at it from different perspectives and different viewpoints.
I have a question regarding pushback.
Pushback is, as you say, it could be legal challenge, it could be sort of, pressure from landowners, from community groups to be involved, to need to further discuss. It's all around managing the sort of the engagement. Again, Councillor Learning, I don't know whether there's anything particularly that you had in mind for this pushback, but it is around the whole mix of people not really wanting to move forward the way that we want to move things forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's inevitable that not everybody will agree with any development that you want to carry out. I think there's definitely we definitely need to take into account the fact that there are neighbours to the scheme, there are other people involved who may wish to bring sites forward in the future. It's not just around, we don't own the whole site, so we need to think about what might happen going forward. We've already seen alternative proposals being brought forward, for example, and that's the kind of thing where we have to get out and explain why we're progressing our vision for the site, rather than running around after all of these different options.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. I know Councillor Lumby has already mentioned the cultural benefits within the another section. But I just wanted to talk a little bit more about, obviously, in the defined site, we've removed those parts of land that we don't own, which does make sense. But it is also this all in that area that was designated for that cultural attraction. Now, given this defined site at this stage of the central Winchester regeneration is going to take some years to come to fruition. I just wondered if either officers or Councillor Learning could say a little bit more about what we're going to be doing at the same time to try and progress that cultural attraction, which I know a lot of people see as important. Thank you.
Yeah, we are in discussions with Marks and Spencers about their options going forward and how we might release that warehouse site, but I can't say too much about that at this point in time. And I wouldn't want to raise false expectations, but we are in constant communication with them at the moment. We're also in constant communication with the Cultural Trust, who are very keen to progress the plans for the cultural attraction on that site. But I think it's also important to say that they're also pursuing other things that will bring activity and life to Winchester in the form of attractions which are, you know, unconventional rather than your classic museum. So this is something which is very high up at the moment on in our work plan and in the amount of time that we're spending on it. So this is very much a concurrent work stream, not something that we're putting off until a later date. But at the moment, I'm feeling quite optimistic.
Thank you. I had a question, if I may. Under the main benefits criteria, you talked about reducing issues with antisocial behaviour. I've not seen really any other references to how that might be achieved. I just wondered what the vision is with regards to that.
Thank you, Chair. The antisocial behaviour, I think we all recognise around King's Walk and that area. It's something that needs tackling, but we're in constant liaison with key groups. We had a meeting last week, we've got another one in a couple of weeks. But by bringing that area back into life and creating a buzz and an activity and some life around that area, it will deter and hopefully prevent a lot of that antisocial behaviour, with people not wanting to linger there anymore. With that in mind, lingering there to enjoy there'll be far more football there, far more activity, so reducing that issue.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any more questions on this section, so we will move on to section 3, the economic case, which is pages 101 to 128. This is the longest case, so I will break it down into its 3.1 and 3.2 so I will take it as a whole section. Ms. Lyons, would you like to give us a brief intro of the highlights of this one?
Of course, yes. The economic case, as I say, it's the second of the 5 cases, and what the economic case does, it sets out the wider social and economic benefits of delivering the project. So it's not the finances and the council affordability, that's in the financial case. What this is by delivering Central Winchester, delivering the project, what wider social and economic benefits can be achieved from that. And this case sets out that.
Thank you very much. Have a minor coup. I'm nodding. Briefly. As the chair said, we're going to go through this section by section. 3.1 is just an intro. 3.2 critical success factors. I see the word Winchester. I think only Councillor Williams can actually pronounce that. Anyway, any comments or questions on 3.2 critical success factors? Nope. So then we go on to the long list of options. There are 4. Let's start with 3.4 and within it the various options. We'll quickly go through those. Any comments on option 1.1? Do nothing. 1.2 was do the minimum. Not very well now. 1.3 do more than the minimum. And 1.4 maximum option. Cool, okay, that's good. We then get to the overall assessment at 3.46, which concludes that do maximum clearly best. Then assessment number 2 at 3.5 is the implementation options, which I think are whether it's single phase or lots of phases. Are there any comments on this whole section, whether we go for questions rather on single phase or incremental phase? Very good. Then we get to the difficult bit, 3.6, which is the delivery options. and we go through each of these.
Excuse me, councillor.
Sorry, councillor.
You have tied down, so.
And also my glasses and too, so I can only see about as far as there. Apologies.
I had a question around the incremental delivery of the site. So, I mean, while I welcome this because it does seem to more align with the SPD, I'm slightly concerned about something that was said in the CWR open forum, which was held last week, where it suggested that a developer may choose to bring forward different phases at different times. And my concern was that given that when we look at the land values, we are factoring into that all the social benefits or the social value that we want to bring in. So that is around the creative quarter, that is around the affordable homes, that is around the excellent public realm. My slight concern is that the incremental development will see those bits which we really want being pushed to the back, and the elements which are perhaps more profitable or can give a better return being brought to the fore. So it will be several years before we see the social value elements. I just wondered if officers could say a little bit about that and how they can assuage my concerns.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. I think key to that is as we move to the next stage of the business case and start looking at the detail of what that we go out to market and procurement for, is crucial is understanding what our key objectives and the red lines are. And again, it might be that through the negotiation there are various different options around the phasing. But again, I think, Mr. Botham, regarding sort of financing, that whole thing has to be taken together rather than looking at one specific element of it. But it can be one of our red lines about the phasing and what we feel is really important to come forward.
Chair, yeah, it is something that we may be able to cover a bit more explicitly in the exam session, but on the point that Ms. Lawrence has made there, the assessment and the appraisals in the strategic business case are based on a specific set of phasing, which has an impact on values. Now, those values could change if some of those proposals were amended prior to that procurement process. But that's part of that detailed business case. The next phase of this, we'll test those options to see what delivers against the economic case that's set out here, what's affordable to the council, and how you bring those two things together.
Thank you. Councillor Price, you had a question?
Thank you, yes. Could you help me understand benefits of option 3.4 compared to 3.3? So I'm looking at pages 115 and 114. Option 3.3 talks about Winchester City Council delivering an on-street bus solution, along with Kings Walk, followed by a development agreement. So option 3.3 is about Winchester City Council delivering an on-street bus solution. Option 3.4 bundles the bus solution into the development agreement with one development partner. Option 3.3 scores poorly with a score of 12, whereas option 4, bundling the bus into the development partner with an agreement, scores highly at 24. So there's a big jump from shifting the bus delivery from Winchester City Council into the overall development agreement. And I'm going to read option 3.3, bus solution delivered by Winchester City Council. It talks about Winchester Council is responsible for delivering on-street bus solutions to involve formatting curb lines, formatting roads and traffic flows. Winchester Council also working with Hatcham Council and bus operators to ensure integration with the wider movement strategy. So if that's what's meant by Winchester City Council delivering a bus solution, how would that be different? How would Winchester City Council's role be different under option 3.4? And how would kind of moving responsibility for buses from Winchester City Council into the development agreement deliver a shift from 12 points to 24 in the ranking?
Thank you, Councillor Press. What I'm going to do, we've got our JLL team on the call. So Jennifer Newsham, who has been working with us to compile the strategic outline case, hopefully is primed and ready. Jennifer, there she is, there we go. Jennifer, could you help out on this one a little bit for us, please?
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone.
So,
can everyone hear me okay?
Sorry, establish some sound.
Just sorting the sound.
Okay.
Chairman, would it just be helpful to establish where we are in the document, because I think Councillor Press has moved on to pages 116 or so? Yeah. So we can race ahead, and that's fine.
Apologies, they're jumping ahead.
Yeah, I just want everyone to catch up with you, that's all. So we were just on that paragraph, Councillor Ferguson had a question about incremental delivery, and then you've taken us forward into that 3.6 section.
Thank you.
Great. Can everyone hear me?
No, louder. Needs to be louder, Jennifer.
Okay. Okay. Right. So I think I'm understanding the question is essentially the differences between Winchester City Council.
One moment, hold on.
I'll try and turn the volume up when we go. Speaker. Okay, if we could try that again.
Is that better? Testing, testing. Testing, testing.
Yes, but speak louder, Jennifer.
Okay, I'm going at full decibels at my end. So hopefully this comes through okay. So my understanding of the question is just to start to think about the differences between the option whereby Winchester City Council deliver the King's Walk Creative Quarter and also the on-street bus solution in comparison to where actually you're delivering King's Walk, but then with a development agreement across the wider site, and how that starts to translate into those differences seen on the scoring table. I think the jump from a score of 12 to 24 was noted there. So what I'll probably do is just explain the thinking behind where we've arrived at some of those scores. So firstly, on the cost, there's a key differential there. If Winchester City Council was to deliver the bus and associated infrastructure themselves, as well as King's Walk, there'd be significant cost attributable to that. So that is one key differential. The planning risk will also be significantly different. Oh, hello. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, probably don't need to shout as loudly now then. So the other key difference would be around the planning risk. So in a situation whereby you're delivering the on-street bus solution, you would likely have to do a hybrid planning application for the whole site, which would mean you undertaking a significant amount of work and taking that through the planning process, thereby you carrying a lot of risk and costs associated with that for yourselves as the council. You're also exposing yourselves to development risk through the delivery of that key infrastructure.
It's going to pause you again. Has everybody followed all of that? I'm aware that we were a bit stop-start and the microphone, you're all right to carry on. Okay, carry on please, Jennifer.
Okay, please do keep stopping me though if it does start to crackle out. The other key point where there's a significant differential is around resourcing and expertise. Clearly delivering a significant infrastructure project like that that the bus solution would require has significant resourcing implications for the council. Whereas actually in the option where that would be put into a development agreement, that responsibility would be transferred over to a partner and away from yourselves. So I hope that starts to highlight the key differentials between those two options. And I think the other very big consideration is around market risk, because in the instance whereby you have already undertaken the bus infrastructure and brought forward the King's Walk site yourselves, what you're left with is essentially a left-hand side and a right-hand side of the site, which would likely already have a hybrid planning application attached to it, and have a smaller developable area when taking it to a market. And we've undertaken a number of soft market testing conversations with developers to understand where the market interest would be for the site. And one of the things that we keep hearing time and time again is to reduce, if we were to reduce down that scale of opportunity, it would have implications for the level of market interest we would expect to see.
Thank you, Jennifer. Sorry for the start for you as well. Do we have any other questions on section 3.6? Councillor Lovely.
Thank you, Chair. A few questions on a few areas. The first area is the disposal, just drawing it on a freehold or long leasehold. First, can I ask that in whatever route we take, please can we go for long leasehold and not freehold? But there are two questions on this. The first is that it effectively says you have no control if you just sell it, which is true to an extent, but there are still controls that you can bring in, and indeed many private sector developers working with local authorities have successfully done that. And there are, so those tools can be deployed if required. So my question is the ultimate receipts from a disposal route greater or less than going the development route or the preferred route option? Appreciate we're not being exempt, so there has to be more of a indicative of which way is up type of situation. And then going on, if we may, to the development agreement and the preferred route, we have had quite a lot of discussion before this about why actually this is not the same as the previous scenario, and indeed it feels sometimes like a little bit of protesting too much, but actually I do worry that actually the real concerns are when you go a DA route, you effectively have transferred the land, or you've given an entitlement land to a single developer. That developer, whatever your DA says, comes back and says, right, I'm here for a renegotiation. And at that point, we've got all our eggs in one basket, because we're with one developer. Are we not really still at risk in that scenario? And then finally, the route of WCC acting as master developer, which I think is meant to be the route where we do little incremental developments. We get one little development for each bit as per the SPD. And I must admit, I didn't quite agree with the analysis on this one, which seemed to assume that we were taking all the risk rather than just transferring it on a little by little basis. Is that because that route was dismissed because there was no market appetite, or were there other reasons?
Thank you, Councillor Lumley. Is that you, Mrs. Knight?
Well, it is, but I am going to then bring in Katie Kopek on this one. Katie, thank you for joining. And Katie can talk us through the differences.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
One moment, we're just turning on the microphone, Katie. Hold on. Okay, you should be good to go now.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Great. If I pick up on the straight disposal and the suggestion that would the receipt be greater by a straight sale than doing it through the development agreement route, the issue will be if you sold the site to begin with, then you won't necessarily see the benefit of any growth over the development of the site. So it is likely, especially with the planning risk, that you would receive a lesser receipt if you sold the site straight away. The reasoning behind going through the development agreement route is that you have a greater level of control beyond just your planning controls, which you would still have if you just sold it. But the development agreement allows you to choose best-in-class developers. That's really what we're at here. This is a great site and we want the best people to be able to deliver it. So we want to have the maximum opportunity in terms of that market appetite, and we want to be able to choose people that have got a track record to be able to deliver these large mixed-use regeneration schemes. And so that would be the whole reasoning behind the procurement process and the selection, which we would do in the knowledge that they would have to sign up to a development agreement with our red lines within it. So all of the people we would talk to would know what we are expecting of them, and they would be chosen accordingly. In terms of all of your eggs in one basket, one of the ways that we would potentially deal with that, and also a way to be able to optimize land value, is we would set up a development agreement which has a drawdown. So they only draw the land down, so i.e. you are still the owners of the land until they draw down each phase and can commence development. At the time of that drawdown, you will then receive a receipt. And if you can imagine a number of different phases, which may be different through the planning process as we draw up the master plan together under the development agreement, you are likely to see increases in land value because the place becomes established. If they do not perform, or they just decide to do something different, then within the development agreement, there will be rights to negate the development agreement. So there are ways, and that's really why we feel that there is a sufficient level of control through the development for you to be able to A, choose best in class, and B, have a route to optimize all of the benefits, not just the economic ones and the financial ones, but the social ones as well, through the process, and by choosing the like-minded development partner that wants to deliver against your objectives. So I hope that's answered the question.
Did that answer your question, Councillor Lumley?
No, we completely avoided it, but we'll come out to that debate.
Are you sure we can?
No, I really don't to spend any more time on it. I'm sorry, if I can get evasive answers, then we'll come back to this next.
Okay, Councillor Becker.
Thanks, Chair. I would actually like to draw on some of Councillor Lumley's questions there. I think you've got two lawyers in the room, and I'm afraid that we are used to dealing with contractual agreements. I do have some concern over the potential for getting stuck in a long negotiation for the DA, potentially for a number of years, with the risk that any development would then be delayed. So a developer may then walk away, and we're stuck back in the situation without development having taken place. So I want some reassurance that we are taking steps at this stage to ensure that doesn't happen. You know, potentially we could include a template or an indicative agreement through the procurement process that set out our red lines to say this is as far as we go, and we will not cross this. This is not going to be up for negotiation at a later date. Would this committee be able to look at that agreement? I think that's something that we would like to look at some future stage. And then in terms of the drawdown,
Sorry, Councillor, can I pause you there for a moment while we respond to that and then come? Sure, thank you. Who would like to respond to that piece with regard to getting drawn in and would we be able to see the agreement?
I think with regards to the contractual agreement and the terms of that agreement, that will definitely be what we're going to be concentrating on over the next few weeks, ready in the build-up to the outline case in the autumn. And again, Councillor Learning, I think you've got some thoughts on this as well. Again, to answer those issues that you've got there, Councillor Becker.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we need to be looking closely at this, working with members across the council in a number of different ways to achieve the best outcome. Clearly, I'm a bit concerned if members are getting involved with too much of their professional expertise rather than taking a strategic view. We have lawyers to write our agreements for us, but I understand your concerns. The other issue is around setting up a reference group which will help us in a cross-party way have a look at some of the details of this going forward, and also bring in outside expertise, which could well include financial and legal expertise, not just be around the normal great and good, if you like, that tend to be involved in these things.
Sorry, Councillor, I for clarification, you saying that rather than the contractual agreement coming to scrutiny, it'd be a group to look at that as it goes forward?
I'd need to take legal advice on what would be appropriate on that, rather than make a commitment to you now, which our lawyers then tell me we can't do that.
Just wanted to clarify what you were saying.
Yeah, so I don't know if the chief executive or maybe Mrs. Knight would like to comment.
Thank you, Councillor Lurley. I think at this stage I would prefer, unless the monitoring officer intends to comment, to say we note that request. And like you, I think we need to understand what is shared with what group of members at what point in order to satisfy both the need to know criteria and aid effective decision making. So I think we know.
just to clarify, it wasn't a request, it was just a question as to whether or not the intention was that it would come to this committee. I don't think we would want to be redrafting it, or it would simply be for information and for comment rather than, I don't think we'd be getting our VPNs out at this stage. It would simply be for information.
Councillor Becky, you were going to progress into another question.
The second question was in relation to the land drawdown. So who does continue to own the land once it has been drawn down as a result of the agreement? Would the council retain the freehold, or does that transfer to the developer? What is proposed in that regard?
I think again, at this stage, it's to be decided. We're really not at that stage yet, and that's all for negotiation discussion as we move to the next stage.
Okay, so it's just because we've got the first option, which is just full disposal, and then the rest of the options didn't seem to discuss what was intended, so thank you.
Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. I acknowledge this whole issue around whether the development agreement comes back to this committee for interest. I think it would be valuable for this committee to, or would it be possible, but I think it would also be valuable to actually be able to look at those red lines. I'm slightly concerned that there might be an element of horse trading that goes on between things which are deemed more or less important. So I don't know whether the opportunity to discuss the broader red lines is an option, where it might be more possible to look at the actual agreement itself.
Councillor Ferguson. Oh, Councillor Lilly.
Thank you. Certainly, I think it's really important that members have a look at whatever the brief's going to be before we go to market for a developer. And I certainly want member involvement in setting both the agreed outcomes and the red lines that were attached to development. Certainly there are things like affordable housing, which is one of my big red lines, but also around us achieving that vibrant cultural quarter that we all want to see.
Councillor Ferguson, I was going to propose that perhaps that is something that would come to one of the other two scrutiny development committees. Is what I was going to propose. I don't know if that's more appropriate rather than this scrutiny committee.
I think that's a matter for the scrutiny chairs to decide between themselves who's most appropriate to have a focused look at that.
Councillor Cress.
Thank you. Just an observation, maybe not on the red line or a green line, but in terms of drawdown, there's anything we could put in place so that the developer doesn't sit on the land, and there's some incentive to actually get on and deliver. I'm sure I'll leave people know better than me about that.
Slides. Yes, thank you. Yes, absolutely. I think the incentive is part and parcel of choosing the right developer partner for a start, but also, again, I might see if Katie is still on the line, because Katie, are you there?
I am.
You are.
One moment, Katie.
Just wait a while, get your microphone on, Katie. I think you'll be well placed to speak to this point.
Can you just, sorry, I am having hearing problems. Could you just repeat the question, please?
Thank you. When you spoke about drawdown, ensuring that there's an incentive for the developer to draw down in a timely fashion rather than just sit on the land and develop at their convenience.
Yeah, in all of the development agreements that I've been involved in, there's always been long stop dates, so that if they don't perform for whatever reason, they forfeit, and the land will still be yours. So they'll only draw it down as they get on with it. So we shouldn't be in a situation where they sit on it, because it's still be your land until they are actually committed to start that particular phase. Does that answer your question?
Sure. I'll probably answer something for debate.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on section 3.6? No, moving to section 3.7 then. Do we have any questions on section 3.7 starting on page 124 of our packs? No? Okay. On to 3.8 then, which is sort of starting on 125 plus 100/126 of our packs. Councillor Ferguson.
Sorry, Chair, I'm obviously not quick enough off the mark with my hand.
I also can't see you because you're hiding behind.
I know. I will wear something bright in future if this is going to be my chair and bring us the stools, because it's not higher. I have a question around the public funding on grants. I know we talk in 3.7.3 options for public funding. We talk about different elements of public funding that we may be able to access. I just wondered if there are any assumptions in any of the business cases that have been put together or in the analysis that's being done of what public funding we could sort of have a good chance of actually accessing, particularly the homes for income funding, and obviously we have more control over still funding ourselves. Thank you.
Slides, please.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. We've worked on looking at what available funding is potentially out there. We're already talking with the likes of Homes England, the LEP. As you say, still we've got a vested interest there as well that we can apply to that. So I think with regards to the appraisals and the finance, we haven't actually factored in at this stage any funding. So we're looking at, as we move forward, where we're likely to be able to access those. And as I say, we're already talking to those partners We've done quite a sort of extensive survey and study on what other sorts and what other avenues of funding there might be, and we're constantly monitoring that.
Thank you, Mrs. Lyons. Any other questions on that section? Okay, 3.9, do we have any sections on the shortlisted options section? Okay, and 3.10 is the shortest section ever, so if there are no questions on 3.9, I'm assuming we're good to go on 3.9. Okay, so moving on to section 4 then, the commercial case. Mrs. Lyons, would you like to give a brief summary of the key points, please?
Yes, thank you. So the commercial case within the 5Ks model looks at what terms and how we would go out to procure. So again, in the strategic outline case, there's not a great detail in this section because obviously that is part of what we do in the next stage, which is the outline business case. But what this does look at is what we will then be looking to explore in detail as we move forward to the procurement and potential contract arrangements. So again, quite a light touch compared to what we'll see in the next 2 stages of the business case.
Thank you, Mrs. Lyons. So, section 4 is the commercial cases, pages 129 and 130 of our packs. Councillor Lomby, you're the first question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The question really is a blunt one here, because in the recommendations at the very beginning of the report, way back when on page 1 and 2, and you can remember that far back, it requests quite a lot of money to be spent for the next stage, and there are total of £360,000 minimum on King's Walk, which I think we'll come to as part of a separate conversation about that. There's also a request for another £500,000 to be spent to do the next stage, which doesn't identify what that is. Can you tell me, because I'm assuming it's writing this commercial case and doing the next thing, how that money is being spent, what its intended home is, and whether we are looking at who should be providing that?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Lomby. The producing of the outline business case is, as you rightly say, part of where that money is needed. And to support that, there are financial analysis, more detailed financial analysis to be done, financial modelling. Again, this is where we refer in the commercial case to using external consultants and external experts. So a lot of the work that we need done will be done by external consultants. With regard then to looking at how we draw up any brief to go out to market, there will be all the marketing documents to prepare, the procurement brief to prepare. We'll need external legal advice right the way through. So you can see there that the 2 work streams that we've got running alongside each other, the preparation of the outline business case, together with all the necessary complementary documents, that if we do want to progress and we do get approval to go to procurement, we need to identify what we're going out to procure for. So those 2 work streams together there.
So is there a breakdown somewhere where you got to that £500,000 figures? Nice round.
No, as I referred to earlier, we've got quite a comprehensive list of key steps and key gateways, which we work through, and each chunk is fully allocated and fully accounted for, and we've got the governance in place to monitor that.
Is that something that can be shared in any way?
I would check that for you. I will check.
Thank you, Ms. Lyons. Any other questions on section 4, commercial case? No. Okay, section 5, talking about the financial case, pages 131 to 133. Mrs. Lyons, key points, please.
Thank you. The financial case is the fourth element of the 5 model case, and what that does is, rather than look at those social and the wider economic benefits, which the economic case did, this looks much more focused on the financial appraisals, the analysis, the viability and the affordability. So that's what this element looks at. And again, at this stage, which is the strategic level, it's quite light touch compared to what we then go on to further investigate as we go forward. But having said that, for this particular outline case, because we know that we want to move things forward and we know that there's a lot of interest in central Winchester, we have done a lot more financial analysis. And I think Mr. Hotham is here for when that comes up in due course. But it's quite light touch compared to what we will then go on to investigate further.
Thank you, Mrs. Lyons. Any other questions on this section? No? Financial case? No? Okay. In that case, we can move on to section 6, the management case, pages 134 to 136. Over to you again, Mrs. Lyons.
The management case, the final of the 5 models, case models, looks at really the deliverability of the options that we've come to. So it will look at, should we adopt the preferred option, how likely and how deliverable is that with where we currently stand.
So do we have any questions on section 6, the management case, pages 134 to 136? Councillor Hall, I should just allow you to catch up. We're on section 6 at the moment, so I didn't know if you had any questions on that as well. Councillor Warren, please.
Apologies, Chair, for my lateness, and we're all locked in, you can't get into the building. It's a feat to get in. My question on the management case is one really about governance, and many councillors who may have already discussed it with you, so I apologise, have asked why council has not had this discussion. I have discussed with the portfolio holder the potential for a council discussion later in the year as the project proceeds. But obviously there's a lot of approval vested in the cabinet. There's only an advisory body elsewhere. So my question is, if we're going to be robust and actually take everyone with us in this discussion, would it not be better to have more of this, and we can reach it that way, it's for us to decide to as councillors through council as opposed to cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Mrs. Lyons or Laura?
Thank you. I'll take that, and then if the MO wishes to comment at that point. Clearly, as members know, the Constitution sets out the decision-making framework, and our MO carefully assesses where the decision sits. And as you can see, this paper here today rests with Cabinet, so that is the decision-making body for these matters. Matters only within the Constitution have to be referred to Cabinet. They're outside the policy or budget framework. So, so that would be our first bar to cross. However, we know that we do have an option to escalate, shall we sort it that way. We can promote the decision making should we wish. But this report itself is currently scheduled for Cabinet as it meets the terms of the Constitution.
Thank you. Councillor Learning.
Thank you. As the Chief Executive said, I do think that this particular part of the business case does sit with Cabinet. However, I think it's really important that members do get the opportunity to prove whatever the final development brief is, what we're going to be going out to market for, essentially, so that we're all clear about what those red lines are, about what the development has to include. And I think to get not only council consent but public consent to that is where we want to be, and certainly council's a really good place to start with that. We also need to look more closely at the process as we used to get there, to make sure there's wider involvement in that. But I think where we're talking about the what we're going to develop, rather than the at the moment where we are is the how are we going to move forward, is the appropriate point for that wider decision making.
Thank you, Councillor Lane. Do we have any other questions on section 600 case? Councillor Crowe.
Thanks. It's probably a similar question, and hopefully not labour required, but just a clarification in terms of paper goes to Cabinet this week, and then work is done on the outline business case. I'm looking at the timeline on page 135. So then work is done on the outline business case, and then the outline business case goes to Cabinet for approval in autumn 2021, which we can imagine will be option 3.5 in more detail. Is there any other, is there a forum for resident communication planned in between? Just to come back to this scrutiny before then, just go straight from Cabinet this week to effectively Cabinet again in the autumn.
Thank you, Councillor Chris. Councillor Lane.
Thank you. We're certainly looking at the programme of public communication about this. As we mentioned, we're quite keen to have another meeting of the archaeology group that was set up. We also want to report back to the public on the outcomes so far, and we think we've got an opportunity to do that. But we will be looking closely at how we do involve the public going forward. Probably another open forum will be held, as well as looking at setting up a reference group to look more closely at this, which we will look to have as much in public as we can, given what may be some of the legal limitations around that. But I'd certainly welcome members' input as to how they'd see that, how they'd like to see that operate going forward.
Councillor Horrell.
Chair, Councillor Cross has identified a really important point on the timeline. It's going nowhere, not to a forum, not to a council, not to a reference group on this timeline until Cabinet look at it again. And I think if you want to take the people and the council with you, and the councillors with you, you need that level of discussion. And I think you'll be brave and actually put that on the calendar and actually participate in that, so that we have consensus amongst the group as it goes forward. I appreciate the constitutional point that the Chief Exec kindly has made us aware of, but we are able, obviously, to ask for these regions, and if the portfolio holder is minded, I'm sure that can be action. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Councillor Weir.
So I'm not altogether clear the extent of what Councillor Horrell is requesting in terms of what she wants the wider council to debate. Is she asking for council to be taken pretty much through this whole process again and we open up this type of discussion, or is there a particular area of action that she feels the council should address?
It's my understanding that she feels there should be some sort of group who are from both sides, cross-party, contributing. But Councillor Horrell, would you like to clarify?
Yes, with pleasure, Councillor Weir. I think this discussion, and I'm sorry, this one it has the Cabinet Council, I think would have been helpful for us all. And certainly as you move along on the decisions that need to be made for this project, and clearly there is a path that I think many of us are minded to support to bring the regeneration to fruition. But if we have those decisions come to council, that is better for all of us. This is a contentious project. We know how things work in Winchester, and I think if you can take everyone with you, with the support of the consultation documents,
and the dialogue that we've had in maybe members' briefings and an open forum, then you're in a better place to move forward. And I would just recommend that. And that's, I'm sure, something that the administration could organise with the officers, given the timelines. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Any further questions on section 6? Councillor Grass.
If I may, just again, it's really going back to the main risk of the project, which is pushback. What meeting main risk as identified on page 99 is pushback from neighbouring landlords and residents. The mitigating action we've got is really stakeholder engagement. So just to emphasise just how important it is to engage with people, to let them know what's going on, to take the opportunity to feedback, so that we really don't get that pushback. And by pushback, we've already identified that potentially means legal challenge. So I'm super keen to make sure we avoid legal challenge and do whatever we can to avoid that.
Thank you, Councillor Christ. No more questions on section 6. We're going to go on to any questions on the appendix, less the exempt appendix G. Do we have any questions on the appendices at all? Councillor Hall. And Chair, please tell me if this has already been discussed already this evening. I'm slightly concerned on the red line, the development proposal on the DA defined site on page 147, because it says very clearly in the document the support for the supplementary planning document, which I am delighted to read and advocated. But obviously some of these lines change what you're able to deliver within the context of the SPD if you move some of the lines accordingly. And I just wanted to understand, and as I said, it's been covered already, please stop me and I can ask others afterwards, but I wanted to understand the rationale for excluding some of those, even though the paper clearly states we've gone for what we own, but there is a huge support for a particular building outside of the line and for its long-term use as a cultural asset. So question is, how do we deliver the SPD if we draw the line as we have? Thank you. Mrs. Lyons.
Thank you, Councillor Orrell. The SPD, as you know, is a comprehensive document that lays out the uses, quantums. We've had that adopted. We then use that as the basis for delivering and developing the development proposals, which was consulted on quite widely and with a lot of support. So what we've done is taken an area within the development proposals, which sits within the FDD, that we can bring forward because people do want to see activity and they do want to see action. It's not to say that we're not doing the others, but obviously the development proposals clearly states that there are these plans for the cultural hub. It's just at the moment it's not within our gift to deliver, but the area that we are able to deliver is something that we can do without compromising what that space will be, because the development proposals state what we're achieving there, which sits within the SPD. Councillor Lurney, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think it's really important that the SPD was designed to be delivered incrementally in phases. What we're looking at today is what we're capable of delivering at this point in time. We're hoping that we'll be able to include the full staplers as we go forward, but that's not entirely in our gift at the moment.
Councillor Weir.
Thank you, Chair. On that subject, I mean, are we aware of any plans for the refurbishment or otherwise of the second surgery building and the reanimation of that rather prominent site, which currently it's a dilapidated eyesore.
Who would like to respond to that one?
Councillor Lowe.
Thank you. We're not aware of any plans at the moment. Nothing's come forward specifically around that site. Clearly, we would like to see it brought into use and reanimated, as you say, Councillor Weir. But again, that's not in our gift.
Councillor Hall, did you have another question?
If I may, Chair, sorry, I'm hogging the show since I'm right. What then, the question really then to the officers and Councillor Learning, and I understand that there is a desire, when we move forward, because of where the line exists, wall staplers, which is actively reflected not in our immediate gift, but our desire to have that usage with HCT, can we be sure that as we go forward on our sort of parallel paths and our incremental pieces, that that is a very clear work stream there that we identify and continue to support, if that is the intended route. The same would be for the car park, which is from Friarsgate, Millbrook Street car park, which is out of the line. So are we having parallel work streams on the incremental basis to bring some of these elements to fruition in due course, and so that we all will clear about the impact?
Yeah, we did actually discuss this earlier, and the answer is very simply yes, and it's a work stream to which we're giving high priority at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you. No more questions on the appendix? Oh, Councillor Nutley.
Sorry, are we on to appendix F?
Any appendix all at once?
Can I ask you about appendix F?
Except for G.
Except for G. I never learned it. Well, anyway, that's what it's about. Thank you, Chair. Appendix F seems to be a financial appraisal for the King's Walk activation works, which seems to show that we don't actually ever achieve a return on it. The bit that I'm confused, because it's all numbers, the lawyer, so we don't really do numbers. Councillor Becker will confirm. But it seems to work on the basis of the £185,000 figure. But earlier on, we're also giving £275,000 worth, and I think there may have been some approvals of works before that. So it's actually £360,000. Also, it says that actually we're giving on and doing surveys and it's still opening up, and actually the costs of keeping King's Walk alive may actually be even higher. Am I confused in my reading of this section? And is it necessarily wise to throw good money after bad when we don't know actually ultimately how much cash we're going to have to throw at this because the bills are coming in?
Thank you, Councillor Lundy. I'll take the breaking down of the finances, and then maybe Councillor Learning can talk to the reasons behind what we're trying to do. So, with regards to where the money is needed, you're absolutely right. We have got a budget that was approved back in March of £200,000 for some really short-term works, which we wanted to spruce up really the ground floor, the public realm, and convert a load of bay into something which we could put some events or markets, something a little bit, you know. So, but that was subject and dependent on spend of that was subject to what came back from the condition survey, because there was a lot of work that we needed to do to understand the shape of the building. So the condition survey has now been carried out. We're well underway with the intrusive survey, but already it's shown, as you're aware, that keeping the building long term is really quite prohibitive cost-wise. But to enable us to keep currently the tenants we've got, there needs to be some general maintenance spend. So that's the £275,000, which we're seeking And that's general maintenance and repairs. That's not improvements or anything to improve the area. It's literally to maintain that building whilst we've got current tenants in there. So that needs spending anyway. What we're also then doing is requesting further budgets. As we're now not doing the long-term solution straight away, what can we do to improve more than the original sprucing up to really start the trend of change? Councillor Lerner, you may want to come in on that one.
Yeah, thank you, Marion. Yeah, as has been said, we are actually fairly confident of the sums that we need to spend in order to keep building in its current function. The option of not spending that money is effectively that we close up the building now, we accept the antisocial behaviour and all the other things that are already happening in that area. We accept that a key junction in our high street, that Marks and Spencer's, Sainsbury's piece, will be dead at both ends with a boarded up King's Walk, you know, and an empty Debenhams. Fortunately, it looks like the Debenhams will come back into use before too long. It's certainly being actively looked at, but I don't think we can afford, for the sake of our high street, to just kill an important part of it. What we can do, since we have to send the money to keep it open, is to make it something that really promotes our high street, that encourages different people to visit Winchester, that promotes our university students, gives them a foot on the ladder, helps us bring a different kind of retail into town, and essentially start that activation, that creative quarter that we want to see in this part of town. It helps us set a direction of travel, and it will help bolster the rest of the high street.
Thank you. Councillor Power. Thank you, Chairman. My question also relates to King's Walk. Councillor Lumby and I obviously read the figures differently, but we seem to be planning to spend 460,000 to enable revenue, continuing revenue stream net to 311. Now, I asked both of them to find out when the current leases expired and also how likely those businesses were to renew, because we know many tenants are struggling at the moment. And I do have reservations about not having an assured income stream after December for those properties, and I would like some clarification on that, please. Mr. Closing.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just picking up on each other point that Councillor Lumby raised around Appendix F. So Appendix F is a capital appraisal effectively, because the report contains a recommendation for additional capital expenditure. What this is demonstrating, this is the finance effect of that. So that's money that wouldn't generate additional income. So there is a revenue impact of that decision. So that's really what that appraisal is illustrating. With regard to existing tenants of King's Walk, we have a surety through to the current leases run to December of this year. There is no indication at the moment of anyone who was looking to end at that time. The option that is being discussed does allow us to maintain the property, the commission, or the investment, sorry, the capital expenditure in this detail appendix there, and the revenue maintenance expenditure that would come from the asset reserve would keep the property operational, and is the only way really of sort of maintaining the 275 is essential to maintain those existing tenants in the situ. As I say, it's impossible to say whether or not they will definitely sign up to new leases. That will be subject to negotiations moving forward. But yeah, those leases run to December. But by investing in the property, as we're saying now, we at least keep that part of the city active and keep it an income generally. The income we're currently receiving, we're able to rely on that moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. President. Any other questions on the appendices? Councillor Borrell, then Councillor Carrasco, then we'll move on to the main body of the report. Thank you.
Chair, thank you. The phasing charts, which we've seen before in various presentations that JLL have produced, are obviously sort of indicative. Assuming that the focus of the next stage is as per the paper recommendations, will future partners be able to review the phasing and amend accordingly if they feel that there is a better way to do this step by step, particularly as in fact Councillor Lerney just mentioned Debenhams and other important spaces nearby that may be coming into use again, and perhaps in a different form than that which we have experienced previously. So it's a question of our intent on phasing if we go forward on the recommendation from the paper. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mrs. Knight?
Thank you, Councillor Hall. I think we touched on the phasing a little bit earlier as well, and I think these development proposals set out our intention at the moment. They set out what we want from the site, and people are behind that. When we then start to talk around how we go to market and what we go out to discuss with developers and development partners, I think, again, as Councillor Lerney mentioned before as well, it's something that we need to be able to be flexible and reflect on. So what we currently intend, everything at the moment in the strategic outline case is based on these assumptions on these phasing. It could be that as time moves forward, there's a flexibility there to respond if necessary to changes.
Thank you. Councillor Carrasco, last question on this bit.
Thank you. Can I speak about Appendix B? The risk register. I do apologise, I get very excited about risk registers. And I've spoken about this one, how it differs to the risk matrix, or the risk list, I should say, in the strategic outline case. Is it possible to talk through this? I mean, as I look through this, and I deal with risk registers a fair bit, I tried to look at which ones I might imagine were more likely than others, and which one would have a greater consequence, and I tried to prioritise the risks in that way. And one good way to look at this is to think, assuming the project's going to fail, where is it most likely to fail? And where should we focus our attention to make sure it doesn't? And I just had to look back at other projects that are taking place in Winchester, which it doesn't have a good track record in the public for delivering projects. So I'm super keen that we do a good job on risk management, to truly identify the risks and manage them well. I do want to spend, and you do understand if I could, particularly legal challenge, because I said I might expect a legal challenge, because we do tend to get them on planning applications. So I'm wondering what procedural requirements not complied with have been imagined, and what we've done to mitigate those procedural requirements that we've imagined might not be complied with. I can understand that it would get complicated because there's the planning application and the advice or the position taken by the council, and the planning application that's made by the council and its advisors. So what legal advice and support do we have around that legal challenge? So some thoughts around the mitigation measures in place. I'd appreciate some understanding. Thank you.
Who would like to pick that piece up for us?
If I may, the MO is just coming online, so I'll pass to Lisa Coe.
Lovely, thank you everyone.
One moment, please, just turning on the microphone, hold on.
Thank you, Natalie. You're good to go, Lisa.
Lovely, thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. The risk register outlines the mitigation as being a close working relationship with the council's legal team. And I can confirm to date that Catherine Knight, as the service lead for legal, has a place on the project board meetings that happen on an extremely frequent basis. And as monitoring officer, I sit on the programme and capital strategy board, as well as on ELB meetings. So there is legal oversight on everything relating to the CWR project. In terms of how we mitigate the risk of challenge, we engage council very early on these matters, and certainly have already engaged council both in respect of procurement and judicial review as the potential areas for challenge there. In terms of that early engagement, it means when we look at recommendation, for example, councillors, on 2B, where we prepare our draft procurement documentation and marketing, it means we have the opportunity to liaise with council at that point. Catherine Knight is on the call, and I would invite her to add anything to the comments that I've made, in particular her role on the project board and how that assists with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. Can you hear me? I don't really have too much more to add than what Lisa said, except there are actually two of us who have oversight into the Central Winchester project in the legal team at the moment. One of the senior property lawyers has been assisting a lot with the project work and feeding in to the title reports. And then there's myself. We've got two counsel on board, both with different specialisms, as Lisa said, one with procurement and one looking at it from judicial review. Early engagement is key here so that we can do the checks and balances as we go through.
Thank you very much. Does that answer your question, Councillor Cress?
I think it does for now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Cress has led us neatly into the main body of the report there. So I will now take questions on anything we haven't already covered that's in the main body of the report. And then when we decide whether to go to exempt or not, we shall take a short comfort break to stretch our legs. We're all a bit hot and sticky in this room. So do we have any questions on the main report itself? We haven't already covered. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question on page 21, 7.1. We make comments that the scheme can be used to showcase sustainable development. And I'm actually delighted to see that sustainability of the scheme is going to be sort of high up in terms of our red lines when we get to them. I just wondered what weight this will be given in choosing the development partner. My understanding is under the Council's current procurement framework, sustainability is only given a 10% weighting, and given the importance of the scheme and what we're trying to achieve, I wondered how we're going to go about actually ensuring that that weighting is substantial enough to bring forward a truly sustainable development partner. You could also argue that one of the key components of sustainability would be to be using local developers, local architects, local builders. And we know we do have considerable expertise of that within the Winchester area. So again, within my question, what opportunity can we please elaborate will there be to actually include our local businesses in the whole scheme? Thank you.
Who would like to respond to that? Mrs. Lennox? Councillor Learning?
Thank you. Clearly we'll need to look as we develop the brief around, as you say, what our red lines are and what the key priorities are. So I think there's more discussion to have about that. I'd have to take advice from our procurement colleagues about what we can and can't do in terms of scoring matrices and fitting that within the legal framework that we need to operate in. Thank you.
Councillor Lumby.
Thank you, Chair. So it's slightly building on a question that I raised before, but I am concerned as to the amount of money we have spent to date and are spending, projecting to spend going forward on consultants. As a lawyer, I obviously welcome consultants' fees, but they need to be taken under careful control, and the consultants need to provide excellent value for money. Is there a breakdown of what has been spent so far on consultants, including on the slight left turn into a King's Walk cul-de-sac that we've now reversed out of, and the projection of those costs going forward? And to what extent are those consultants just been charging an hourly rate, or have they been on a fixed fee for elements, or are they on a contingency fee going forward? I.e., if this doesn't happen and Councillor Brask's nightmare occurs, are we going to be sharing that pain with our consultants, or are they going to be happy?
Mrs. Lumby.
Thank you, Councillor Lumby. With regards to the money that we've currently spent and are due to spend, I keep referring to our magic document of milestones and key steps. Very tightly monitored. There's a very strict protocol about the governance and how we get spend approved. An awful lot of work has gone on with regards to developing the principles set out in the SPD, through to the development proposals, through to working through the strategic case, and then planning towards what we're going to be doing next. So what you see here is tip of the iceberg as to the amount of work that's being done. But on that, again, like I say, it is strictly controlled through the governance processes that we have. It is itemised. It's not on an hourly basis. There's fixed fees for fixed tasks. And as I say, it's very strictly monitored. So I hope that answers.
Thank you. Any more questions on the main body of this paper? Councillor Hall, please.
Thank you, Chair. And it relates to 3.2 on page 17. We've touched on it slightly, Mrs. Heaven and Mrs. Knight both obviously came online, but the divide between council development and council planning, we have already fallen foul of on another project where we had a legal case against us. And those rules are very important. What are we doing differently on central Winchester to ensure that those rules are clearer and more defined, and that we don't have the same complication that we've had on another major development in the city? Maybe for you, and very maybe for some of your colleagues, but what have we learned and what are we doing differently to prevent that? Thank you.
Mr. Watson, can I trouble you for a microphone? Mrs. Kirkman, can I invite you to come and speak to? One moment, you just get the microphone switched on. Okay, we're ready to go. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, members. Thank you, Councillor Horrell, for the question. Indeed, we have learnt some lessons and already have in place the Chinese wall that is between the local planning authority and the director and the developer, in that we have a lead director for each of those roles. So at the moment, I am the lead director for the local planning authority, and John is acting as the lead director for the developer. So there is already a clear line of division between the director team in terms of their responsibility. The Chinese Wall Council Horrell is one that should not be set too high, but certainly should not be set too low. And that is something that we have to continually review as we move forwards. But that doesn't mean that there cannot be good communications between the council as landowner and the council as local planning authority, as a local planning authority would engage with any landowner who was looking to develop land this significant within the city. So I do believe that we have addressed those points, and at the moment that is working well in terms of the two hats and the two roles played by those directors. So I hope that's reassuring.
Chair, can I just ask, whilst we have Mrs. Pepper on the line, because in the report it talks about fees for planning advice, so clearly external planning advice is being sought. Just to understand, is that so that we stay away from us, Winchester, as a planning regulator, and therefore take advice elsewhere rather than using our own internal resources?
Yes, so Councillor Horrell, as the director for the LPA, I would probably defer this to the director on behalf of the developer. But yes, that is planning consultants who are acting on behalf of the developer, because the local planning authority planners are on this side of the wall.
Thank you. Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just come back to Councillor Lumley's question? And you referred very nice to the tip of the iceberg and the governance process and all the amount of hard work that's gone into this. But I would like to know, we refer to it as a standard fee, but do we get to see that sort? Do we get to see that breakdown of what each person has been paid for any one project? Again, I will double check that for you, Councillor Cook. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on this remaining report? Councillor Morrell. 13.6 on page 29, Chair, talks about the SPD and the use of multiple developers. Again, you may have covered some of this earlier, and that the opportunity in the SPD was that potentially we would have one developer, but we could then have subsets that were experts underneath who had particular areas of expertise, be it housing or the like. And that model sort of allowed the opportunity for different styles, different approaches, different knowledge to be used. So that's how the SPD was crafted with that in mind. Is the reference here in 13.6 the reassurance that we will be taking that approach in the way that the recommendation is coming forward for one developer? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. I think that the recommended, the preferred route of using a single development partner across the defined area can definitely allow for that sort of approach whereby specialist developers are brought in, sitting underneath, depending on the sorts of development partners that we're talking to, depending on whether they've got the expertise in-house. There could be different architectural practices approached as well, because as we know, we've got locals involved. So at the moment, the detail of that will come forward through the next case, at the outline business case. What this approach allows for is the flexibility to explore that and write that in and build that in to any procurement documents or any red lines that we might have.
Chair, so I'm not sure 13.6 says that specifically, but I'm reassured by what you say. So if that is the intent, that would be excellent if that was our route forward, if that could be recorded.
Yeah, absolutely, Councillor Morrell. Right, and I'm not seeing any more questions on the main section of the report. Are members minded that they would like to ask questions of the exempt Appendix G appendices? Yes? Okay. Could somebody please propose you move to accept? So seconded. Okay, proposed by Councillor Roll, seconded by Councillor Power. We will now move to exempt. While officers ensure that we are stop recording all the correct things, can I say we will have just a 10-minute comfort break and come back here at 15:15 according to that clock, which is slightly fast. So that's actually 10 past.
Chair, sorry, could I just also say, just for the benefit of members online joining us in the exam session, I'll be sending out a separate link. So we will need to end this Teams meeting, and I'll send out a separate link for those members.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. So reconvene at 9:10. Thank you.
Doing the bits that we need. And yes, we can take the land back. If they don't develop it, the problem is there going to be bits that aren't so valuable or may even have a negative value. So it's a really important issue that will need to be addressed at the next stage and will be, need to be got right. And as a related point, when you go with a single developer, there's the risk that you have placed all your eggs in that basket. If that developer chooses not to proceed with bids, then you don't have anything other than taking that back and to start again. This route is the one that probably gives us the greater level of control and involvement, but we need to be sure we have the right team and the right people operating on it. So I think that the council has shown tonight the expertise she has. I'm grateful for that. I am concerned with how much money we have already spent on consultants, how much money we are going to spend on consultants. I would really like to see the breakdown of those figures. I take reassurance that each element has been totally negotiated, I think that's the phrase, and controlled, but ultimately, without a contingency, without a success element, ultimately the consultant was just going away and doing, just providing the advice and churning on, sending in the bills. And I am worried by some of the approaches I'm afraid I heard tonight. I'm going to be blunt about this. I thought that some questions I asked were deliberately not answered, half answered or evasive answers, and an attitude which I have heard repeated in a number of the open forums of when we do this, when we do this, when we do. No, the consultants do not do those things. The cabinet or the or the council, the officers, they do, they decide, and it is not for the consultants to decide. And I think it is important that we, going forward, have a firm control on the consultants, and we have the capacity and the strength and the understanding to make sure that it's our project with our objectives and with our outcomes. And is not taken over. So I am genuinely concerned about that. I'm also noting, worried that, and Councillor Erling was very clear. I know, I don't criticise it. She was quite clear. We may never get the bus station. It may never happen. We may never have a new bus station. And we need to go into this with open eyes that may never happen. It may not be affordable, it may not be practical, it may not be achievable. And on the route we are going, we are not going to, that is a potential risk. And I think that's a shame, because I think the bus station is an important part of the SPD. I think the cultural offer also needs to be made sure that we, that's kept, that's part of it. The whole idea of creating a Winchester-ness, still can't say it, sorry, and creating this special destination really needs the cultural element, and we need to be clear in this that that's something we want to be achieving, and I hope we as a group can agree that's something we do want to see. King's Walk, just very quickly, look, you know, we are not necessarily going to be making vast sums of money, and we as a council aren't exactly what with cash at the moment. I have a residual worry. I mean, I think the idea of not doing the earlier scheme, the one we were looking at before, is the right answer. I do worry that, and it may just be unfortunate phraseology, but doing the King's Walk activation just to mitigate political risks is unfortunate. It seems that we are putting extra money, we're not going to get back into it, and I do wonder whether in reality that is the right way to spend the money, and whether we are better ultimately to bring that one to an end and get on with the demolition there. And finally, I would really like to see whatever happens, the freehold retained here, so that we can operate and protect the whole area for the future and future generations. Not necessarily about having an income, but it's about having the control of the leasehold structure gives you a wonderful public realm, so that generations to come will enjoy the wonderful thing that hopefully we are creating. And that's what I want to say, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Longby. Councillor Williams.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think one of the things I wanted to say is it is really kind of exciting, we're at sort of an exciting time. We've got things like the carbon neutrality plan, which allow this kind of movement that actually we're trying to look at everything in that slightly more sustainable way. We're coming out of COVID at a point where everything's actually really changed. And also the way people shop, the way people interact with towns is changing. And I feel hopefully what we're trying to do does feel like it's trying to reflect this. There's this great idea about the public realm, and looking through all the numbers and trawling through them, yes, there does seem to be, sometimes things that may concern us. But equally, a lot of what we're doing is not for financial benefit. The point of a council is not to make a profit. We are not, at the end of the day, a business. We need to sustain ourselves, but we don't need to give shareholders money. So it is a different prospect that we're sitting at. And I think, this idea of this city centre living and actually making a sustainable community that has great culture, great public realm, and actually, this kind of cultural art centre, to me seems like something we should be proud of, that we actually are moving forward and driving on. And it has been difficult. I mean, I recall sitting in a meeting, before my children were born, and they're going off to university, the first one, about central Winchester and its regeneration. It's taken longer than it took me to raise my kids. And I think hopefully, finally, we are moving towards something. And it is a consensus, it is all of us trying to work together. And there will be problems, and we live in a place where there are lots of people who have lots of opinions, and we have to work with that. But I do think, looking at what we've been presented today and what's been here, you really do have a very strong, solid idea of what's going on, and a really good kind of concept, and and actually more than that, a plan, something that's driving through. And it makes me feel actually quite positive. And I know that doesn't sound right for most of the meetings tonight, for most of us, but actually I think it's a positive thing. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Who else would like to say? Councillor Wynne.
Thank you, Chair. I second what Councillor Williams has just said. I do think that what we've got here is a really competent, strong, solid start to what is clearly going to be a very extended process. And there's much more work for us to look at. And there'll be many opportunities in the road ahead for further challenge and engagement. But particularly, I'm glad to see that many of the hard lessons of the past 10 years of repeated failure are being learned and addressed in this new approach. And I think it should give us all much greater confidence that we are poised to start on a real delivery of the SPD and regeneration of Central Winchester. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Weir. Any other debate overall? Councillor Ferguson?
I would also like to echo Councillor Williams, Councillor Weir, and I'd also like to applaud officers for all the work that they've done to get us to this stage. The report was detailed and long, but it's allowed us to look at the conclusion that to have a single development partner where we actually do the work in incremental stages, where we set up a strong development agreement, which will have our outlines for what we want to achieve, which focuses on making sure that we do get that social value, we do get the creative quarter, we do get the affordable housing. I think that's all to be applauded. I also think that this is the right time to be pressing forward, in that we know that Winchester is falling behind in terms of its competitiveness with our neighbours. A lot of our neighbours are pressing forward with this regeneration, and absolutely this has been a long time in the coming. I've been here 22 years and this has been talked about throughout that period of time. I would also like to say that I do think that there is a value in doing the interim works at King's Walk. We do know that we have a 9 to 12 months period to get to the next stage, perhaps having a partner. We then know there could be several years in planning, etc., before anything actually begins to happen on the ground. We are coming out of a COVID recovery. We do know that the lower high street does need a boost. In terms of an injection of interest. I do think that the interim works would kind of set the direction of travel, and agree with council and learning on that. So even though we won't necessarily get a return in the way that we might like on those interim works, I do think they are worth doing. The only other thing I wanted to comment on, Chair, was I am slightly concerned that the strategic business case wouldn't necessarily come to scrutiny before it goes to Cabinet. And I just wondered, I know you talked about possibly sending it to one of the sub-scrutiny committees, but I personally think it would be better placed if it's going to any scrutiny committee to come to full scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Any other debate? Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to officers and the advisors for all of the work that you put into tonight's document. It clearly has taken many hours and is helpful in our understanding. I want to reiterate that the SPD is a cornerstone for us. It's the rallying document, and I haven't heard anyone, anywhere in this room or outside, saying they don't support it. So I think that is an opportunity for us. My worry slightly is that we're not delivering all that the SPD, all of the 9 objectives in the document in the proposal we've seen this evening. And particularly the investment objectives, in my view, are not robust, although they're tabled as being an amalgamation of the SPD and the council plan. I don't believe that they deliver in all ways that everyone would aspire to. I'm also concerned that the maximum option which is being advocated within the proposal on page 105 is not deliverable against the landmass that we're putting forward, and that really what's 2 halves of the equation. And that may be absolutely right, but I think it is better to be clear and say that. I do think you could help us, officers and consultants, by sharing where you can some of the documents that have been referred to this evening. We chatted in the break to Mr. Botham about whether some information was available. You know, what did the stock market testing tell us over and above what's in the report, so that we could have that knowledge, and that would help us all to clarify our position. I actually think King's Walk is a distraction. I don't think a creative quarter is, because that's the objective. But King's Walk itself is actually getting this all muddled up. We can deliver a creative quarter, it just might not be in King's Walk. So I think we have to separate the objective from the building, and I think King's Walk as an entity has been a distraction. We want the creative quarter, that's clear, that's in here, but there may be other ways of delivering it. And finally, Chair, I would ask wholeheartedly that we look at the governance of this project. On the timeline we've seen this evening in the document, we talk about the next decision coming to Cabinet. We know that there's a huge public interest in this project, so the forum is really important. There is talk of obviously an advisory group that has some further discussion, but obviously an opportunity for this committee, Scrutiny, to further analyse the next stage, and for council itself to be included, I believe would be a huge and positive step forward for this project, and hopefully bring a positive conclusion. So, Chair, I hope those are helpful points that the administration will take on board, and I can only say that I've indicated this to the portfolio holder. I absolutely want to see this project come to fruition, so my comments hopefully are made in the context of trying to make sure that that happens, and Winchester has this part of the city redeveloped to fit with all the other activities in this wonderful place that we know everyone loves. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Going on to a point you raised regarding King's Walk, I wholeheartedly agree that that's creating a muddle here. The artistic quarter, having something inspirational, something completely different that brings a new offering to Winchester is absolutely essential. King's Walk, I would disagree, is the place for it. The Meanwhile Uses project that was pushed aside a couple of years ago now was far more interesting and delivered a far more appealing option to attract different variety, a different dynamic to Winchester. I don't feel you'll get the same bang for your buck with King's Walk, so I hope that that isn't taken forward when an alternative is sought for that. So that's it for my debate. So I'm not seeing any more debate this evening, so if I could pick up these points and please do correct me if I've missed any. So the points going through, key points, we've had an archaeology group to be established, hopefully by September. I'd like us to commit to that. There was a piece about keeping the families offering in mind while we're going through all of this, keep culture at the heart of the project, and create dependency on the archaeology, potentially. There was a question about would the contractual agreement come to scrutiny, the request was noted. The request for a committee to look at the red lines to cite and future strategic case. But I'll come on to the future strategic case there at the moment. So what we're looking for is an advisory group, a cross-party advisory group that can come together and discuss this at an earlier stage. We also picked up on the fact that we'd like full
council discussions of the red lines, and councillor Learning agreed that should happen. On the lines across party contributions. Looking for lessons learned, ensuring that differentiation and separation between planning and development side should not leave us open. There was also a request for a full business case on numbers and worth, that it might be worth bringing forwards at some point. The absolute request for the strategic business case to come to scrutiny again next time before it comes to cabinet, and picking up on what Patrick Davis said in public speaking earlier, I would request that that's done in a more timely way. And finally, look at the governance of this project overall. Does everyone agree that that sums up the key recommendations? Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chair. The only thing, unless I've missed it, we also referred to the consultants and keeping firm control and a breakdown of what their actual costs are, please. Thank you.
Okay, I've added that on. So, coming back to the recommendation, which was that scrutiny committee comment on proposals within the attached.
Oh, sorry, Chair. We're looking at the strategic business case. It's the outline business case that comes next.
Apologies, I've written that in two places, and one place is correct. Apologies. The outline business to come to scrutiny next time. So, coming back to the recommendation that scrutiny committee comment on the proposals in the attached cabinet report, we've got our recommendations and our comments back. Does everyone agree that we have given some thorough airing and they're good recommendations set to
Brilliant.
Agreed.
Chairman, may I suggest we try to get those phrased up tomorrow and see if it's clear that the possibility happens on this.
So, members, I said at the start of this meeting I anticipated a 10:30 finish. It's now 10:30. We still have 3 papers to go through. I would like to put it to members that we defer the 2 outturn papers to September and look at them retrospectively. We've had some pre-discussion a week ago, and there are notes on that. However, I don't anticipate those being completed within 15 minutes, particularly given the feedback that I was given last Monday. So what are members' views on that? That we defer certainly the 2 outturn papers. Potentially we just go through the feedback from the panel on the overall Q4. What are members' thoughts?
I think we're going to propose. Madam Chairman, I think we should adjourn this meeting another day.
We still need, if there are items on the agenda, we still need to go through. We do need to appoint, don't we, this evening?
I think that would be helpful, Chair, if we can do those appointments at least, but clearly the 2 outturn papers are significant papers and we would want to curtail debate on session debate on those.
So, can I have an agreement to defer the 2 outturn papers and defer those to September's meeting? All agreed?
Agreed.
Councillor Hall?
Chair, the only question I have, given the request we've made this evening for the scrutiny committee to do the next facing, that we don't find ourselves as we have tonight, where we're backed into a corner and we have obviously a very important additional piece of work on Central Winchester to review, and then the outturn papers again. So if necessary, Chair, I suggest that we have a separate meeting for the different agenda items rather than trying to put them all together if necessary. And obviously officers will need to go into that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. That's a discussion I already had with the Chief Exec before I proposed the deferral, asking what is already at the September meeting, and currently it's just the performance review.
So I've indicated that there are likely to be other items added to that, but if need be, we will call an additional meeting because we are not having this again. Thank you, Councillor Hall. Okay, so we're all agreed on that. So,
Councillor Hall, since we can, I did propose that we adjourn this meeting. I take the Chief Exec's point that we need to agree the external body appointments, but I am proposing that we adjourn when we have completed that paper.
Chairman, of course, that proposal is on the floor. Clearly, an adjournment means that another date could be found. I think we need to be realistic, members, whether we can find another date that the officer team and yourselves can attend to before the September meeting. But that has been put on the floor before you. That's the book if you wish to pursue that.
I would happily defer, as I've said, to the outturn papers. Would members prefer to adjourn the whole meeting and find another date to complete it, or add it to the September meeting? Yes, please. So, adjourn.
I think it would reduce the risk of if we do get the
Mike,
I think it would reduce the risk of a repeat of tonight if we could adjourn and have another meeting.
So, Chairman, there's a proposal to adjourn the meeting. I think that's seconded, and then we need to move to the vote.
We will second that and vote on it, please. Okay, all those in favour? Those against?
Chairman, we'll take that away. Clearly, I just need to log for members. We are a week away from the summer holiday for everybody. We are just coming out of COVID. We will look to see whether we can find a date. If we can't, then I think, Chair, if we can then defer to the September meeting, will be the way to go here. But we will look, as that is the will of the.
Thank you. So appointments of external bodies related to scrutiny. First of all, we've got the Portsmouth, this is item 13 on the agenda, Portsmouth City Council Health and Overview Scrutiny Panel. There's one vacancy. Do I have nominations, please? Councillor Hall.
Councillor Mike Reid.
Thank you.
Chairman, Councillor Roger Bonnet.
And Councillor Roger Bento. Those all in favour of Councillor Reid? Those all in favour of Bento? So Bento gets that position. Centre for Governance and Scrutiny on the Scrutiny Champions Network.
You need a deputy to.
Oh, apologies.
One vacancy, one deputy.
Apologies, I didn't read that. No. Okay, deputy.
Councillor Mike Reid.
Councillor Mike Reid. Do we have a deputy proposal from the other side? No. Okay, Councillor Mike Reid is deputy. Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, my understanding is that has to be me. Am I correct in my understanding of that?
Yes, Chair, it's traditionally not the chair of the.
Thank you. That'll be me if somebody would like to replace. Thank you. Partnership for South Hampshire Overview and Scrutiny Committee, one vacancy, one deputy. Do I have nominations? Councillor.
Councillor Bento, Roger Bento.
And I would like to nominate Councillor Horrell for that. So those in favour of Councillor Bento? Those in favour of Councillor Horrell? Deputy, I'd like to nominate Councillor Horrell. Councillor Horrell's deputy. Thank you. So now we are adjourning the meeting. I would like to thank everybody for their attendance and engagement tonight, essential which is our new being long item. So we shall adjourn, but I suspect I shall see you all in September. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.